Hello, everybody. How's it going? Welcome back to another video on World of Tanks console. And today we're talking about a very, very, very old and very kind of iconic German Tier 8 premium heavy tank, which is, and I'm going to say this name one time and one time only in its native language. And after that, I'll refer to it as the Lion because that's what it translates to. Because it sounds terrible when I say it. So apologies, but this is the Tier 8 German heavy tank, the Lowe. And that's the only time you'll hear me refer to it as such because this thing is a lion and I can't say that word worth shit. So, anyway, the German Tier 8 Lion. This thing is maybe I can't remember off the top of my head what premiums came available, but I know this is one of the very first ones, and this thing has a kind of a fierce reputation for being sort of a wallet warriors tank that came from PC initially and kind of made its way to console. You know, back in the day, working your way through the tiers wasn't so easy as it is now. There was no XP boosters, there was no challenges and things like that to give you bonus XP or XP boosts. So people would kind of classically in this game get to tier 4, tier 5, their first real grind, realize this sucks, and then flash some cash and pick up a heavy premium tank at tier 8. And this was one of the few ones that was actually available. And people did very, very poorly in this machine. So that's not to say this is a bad tank. I actually think this is in some ways a pretty good tank, even though it'll never be considered overpowered just because of how it plays and its weaknesses. So we'll talk about all those obviously, but just a bit of background with my experience with the tank. I've had this tank for a very long time. I have more than 500 battles with it. I've made a lot of credits. Tier 8 premiums in World War II are your best credit makers, and I got this tank because my first premium ever was actually the German Tier 8 premium tank destroyer, the Jagdtiger 88. And what I really wanted to do is get a vehicle that had some armor like the Jagdtiger, but wasn't limited with a fixed gun, because I really do enjoy turrets. So I kind of looked around, I saw this thing, and I thought, I knew going into it, this thing isn't incredibly overpowered, but I did like the idea of having a tank that you could play intelligently, excuse me, and do well in. And I picked it up, and I honestly I have loved this tank ever since. It is not the best tank in the game by any means, but you can do pretty well with it, as you'll see in some of the replays I have for you guys today. So, what made this tank really good, and what was kind of its draw, so to speak? Well, its big kind of strength when this tank was first released, certainly in comparison to other tier 8 premium heavy tanks, was the gun. So with its above standard, I'm sorry, it's above average standard penetration. You get 234 millimeters on this 105 mil gun, and compared to, say, at the time, something like a T-32 at 198, it was a lot better. And even a tank that had great standard penetration, like a Tiger 2 at 225, this thing was just that slightly one tier better kind of thing, almost tier 9 levels of penetration on a tier 8, which is fantastic because unlike, say, an FCM 50T, you do not have preferential matchmaking, so you will see tier 10 games, and if you can't see tier 10 games, you will see tier 10 games in World of Tanks console, I promise you. So that above average standard penetration really helps you deal with some thicker armor sometimes, getting through weak spots that other tanks would maybe have to load premium for when they're bottom tier. And then obviously when you are top tier in a tier 8 game, there's very little circumstances where you're actually going to have to load your premium rounds. But speaking of premium rounds, this thing also has pretty crazy premium penetration at 294 millimeters, which is, I mean, that's tier 10 tank destroyer levels of penetration. So if you do find yourself in tier 10 games, you've always had the option to go ahead and load these rounds. And even though you're not going to make as much credits and money if you're spamming premium rounds, this is at the end of the day premium tank, so you can feasibly shoot nothing but premium and still make a profit, albeit not as much. This tank nowadays also has pretty solid alpha damage for a tier 8 heavy tank at 360, which is above the average of around 320 that a lot of tier 8s have had in the past and still kind of have nowadays. So it does have a nice bit of alpha damage, although damage is not this thing's specialty, which we're kind of going to talk about. And the other big allure was certainly the accuracy. So this gun has always been very, very accurate, even before the days of 6.0 when everything got stupid accurate. You know, the original 360 days of World of Tanks console, back when it was just World of Tanks Xbox, this thing was a sniper. You know, you could just pick apart enemies at range. You could snipe cupolas and weak spots, and that's absolutely still the case. This gun is really reliable if you give it time to fully aim. Snapshotting, on the other hand, there's quite a bit of bloom you're going to see here, so wouldn't necessarily recommend that, but I really do like how reliable this gun is, and it has done me well over the years. Another feature about this tank that's kind of strange is this is a German heavy tank, but you have a full 10 degrees of gun depression, which is distinctly un-German. There's not another I don't know if there's another German heavy tank in the game I could think that has that much gun depression, and that allows you to actually kind of play ridgelines, which is usually not the German heavy tank's MO. Usually you're thinking more of a brawling tank that enjoys cities and corners and things like that, which this thing absolutely still can do, but you have the added flexibility of having good gun depression matched with a very strong turret, actually. This turret, outside of one weak spot, which we're going to talk about, is incredibly strong. If you look at the gun mantlet, the funky angles on it, as well as the rounded cheeks of the vehicle from the front, this is actually a very tough turret to penetrate because the top cupola is actually located towards the back. And this is a very tall tank, so even if when you're not using gun depression, that cupola in the first place is hard to even see if you're not yourself in a tall vehicle. And then it's even harder to hit because it is a very small target. So the last wonderful thing about this tank that I'm going to talk about before we get into the cons is the credit modifier. So we're going to talk a little bit about credits, and forgive me, this is going to be some nerd math, but I do like to talk about it because it's important to understand how it works. This machine has a 165% credit multiplier, and that's significant because most tier A premiums come in at 150% credit modifier, which is basically 50% more credits than a standard vehicle. And you might think to yourself, well, 165% versus 150%, it's not a massive jump. And you're right, it's not necessarily the raw credits before you factor in ammunition and repairs are all that much more. But that 15%, I'm going to throw some numbers at you. Again, forgive me for the nerd math, but let's say you have a game in a standard tier premium tank where you make 100,000 credits, okay? And after ammunition, repairs, consumables comes into effect, let's just say that's 40,000 credit deduction. That means you walk away with 60,000 credits profit for walking away from that game, okay? Now take this vehicle, which would earn 15% more credits, meaning you earn 115,000 credits before all the deductions come into effect. Now, when you take away that 40,000, you're left with 75,000 percent, 75,000 credits as opposed to the 60. So that 15% increased credits actually got you 25% more overall profit from 60 to 75,000. That's 15,000 credits, and 15,000 is 25% of 60. So just some nerd math there for you. This thing earns an absolute bunch of credits, as you're going to see in these games. I do have a 25% credit XP booster during this session that I have showing you guys, so they are kind of hyperinflated, but you can earn a lot of money in this thing. Again, I surrender the fact Cold War is absolutely the better mode to grind credits for, but if you're like me and you don't particularly enjoy Cold War as much as World War II, this is a phenomenal credit maker, and it has made me probably tens of millions over the years. So those are all the pros. The cons: this thing is slow. It is 90 tons. It does not have a powerful engine. It struggles going uphill and off-road, as you're seeing in this game right here. It is just the definition of slow. Slower than Tiger 2, slower than maybe most tier 8 heavy tanks outside of other super heavies. It does everything kind of slow because it also has a really slow aim time. So even though, like I said, you have a very accurate gun, you're going to see me just have to wait and wait and wait to get these shots off. And the more time you spend aiming, effectively, the lower your DPM is because you're not shooting. And speaking of DPM, this thing has always, always, always suffered from a criminally horrific amount of damage per minute, and I don't know why, because this thing, even if you gave it average or even above average DPM, is still nowhere near overpowered or game breaking as a tier 8 tank. All right, on release, this thing had 320 alpha damage, unlike now, with a 5 rounds a minute rate of fire, giving it just 1,600 damage per minute, which is about 25% worse than most tanks, other heavy tanks, I should say, at this tier. And it's not any better these days. You see my reload here. It's like 11 seconds for 360 alpha. It is just abysmal. It is really crap. You also turn slow, so you aim slow, you reload slow, you aim slow, you move slow. This is everything about this tank is slow, which is so antithetical to what I enjoy in a tank in this game. And for some reason, I still love it. It's very strange. The armor is serviceable, and we'll talk about some of the buffs, but if you're not hold down or side scraping, you have the traditional German lower plate weakness, so you have to be careful. If you're caught out in the open, and especially against tier 9 and 10 tanks, they're gonna butcher you. You know, even your upper front plate, forget the lower plate, can get penetrated if you're not angling well, and if you're in the open fighting some higher penetration rounds. So, this thing has worse armor, at least initially, and we'll talk about it, than say a Tiger 2, right? And that's because when this tank was made in the game, it was a different kind of philosophy that wargaming had for premium tanks, and that is that premium tanks were supposed to be worse versions of their tech tree counterparts, but earn a lot more credits. And it was a great trade off. And you know, I won't go too far into it, but World of Tanks console has certainly lost that philosophy over the years. There's some absolutely insane premium tanks that are just out and out better than their tech tree counterparts, and this thing really is a relic of its time in that regard. I don't think it's a bad thing. I like the fact that this thing has so many weaknesses and is worse than a tech tree tank that you have to actually go out and earn, so to speak, instead of just flashing some cash and kicking everybody's ass because you're driving a better vehicle. The last kind of thing I'll talk about with the cons here is it has the typical German curse. You can't get set on fire from the front, but you'll have your engine damaged. And that's because these vehicles have a frontally mounted transmission. So that lower plate weakness, unfortunately, really kind of is amplified because not only are you going to get you're not only going to get easily penetrated, but you're also going to have your engine knocked out. And let me tell you something right now. If you do not run the premium consumable for your repair kit, you're going to have so many games with a busted transmission. If you think this thing is slow with a working engine, let me tell you something, brother. Holy crap, playing this thing with a damaged engine it's miserable. You're slower than a T95 and you're going to be tempted to just quit the game. So, over the years, this thing hasn't had too many changes. There's two that are the most significant. One, as we've talked about, it now has 360 alpha damage from its original 320, and that's a change I always wanted to see because if you just increase the alpha damage, it would have DPM that's more in line with the other tier 8 heavy tanks, and they kind of missed the mark because unfortunately what they did is they buffed it from 320 to 360 alpha damage, but they also reduced the reload to compensate. So is it a buff? Is it a nerf? It is what it is, effectively. The other thing too is they did give it a significant armor buff. So this thing used to have 120 millimeters on its upper front plate and 80 millimeters of side armor. And both those values have been buffed. Its upper front plate is now 150 millimeters, and its side armor is 100 millimeters. Now, that upper front plate is a great buff, and it absolutely helped you out quite a bit in terms of people just auto aiming and penning your upper plate. But to a degree, you're still kind of vulnerable because it's not sloped as well as you'd like it to be. But that side armor buff is the most significant buff because going from 80 to 100 while only 20 millimeters, when we talk about percentages, is 25% thicker raw. And also, when you're side scraping, that means you have 25% better effective armor as well. And that really comes into play when you're side scraping. You want thick armor because if you angle past the automatic ricochet angle and you actually have to present an armor value that enemies roll against, that 25% increase to effective thickness is significant. Let's just say, and again, sorry for the nerd math here, but I'm a nerd, man. What do you want me to do? If I have 80 millimeters of side armor and I side scrape and I show a bit much, maybe suddenly that is 200 millimeters effective armor, and a 100 millimeter plate at the same angle, it's 25% thicker raw, will have 25% thicker effective, which would make it 250. So you can start getting some crazy increases to your side armor's armor value when you're side scraping. So this thing, when it got that armor buff, became a better side scraper than the Tiger 2, which is awesome. As I said previously, I think premium tanks should be worse than their tech tree counterparts, which this thing certainly is, but it does have something unique over the Tiger 2, which is its standard and premium penetration as well as side armor capabilities. So if you're playing this thing well, like you saw me do in the last game, I blocked almost 3,700 damage. You can get quite a few steel walls, and I think that's why I really like this tank, because even though the damage comes so slow and it's kind of infuriating sometimes because you just can't pump out enough damage to prevent people from rushing you on a flank or actually impact the game in terms of kills and damage that you get. What you can do, since you have such a ridiculously long reload, is bait shots for your team. And if you have support so people can't push you and YOLO you, you can actually play that traditional heavy tank role and really take a lot of damage, which is really satisfying. And sometimes I actually enjoy blocking damage more than I like doing damage. That's why I like tanks like this, like the IS-4, you know, tanks that don't rely on DPM and damage and really contribute if you can use your armor intelligently. This is not intelligently rolling around the corner like that, but you'll see me do a pretty good job here in blocking quite a few shots from enemy tanks with some pretty strong guns in this game. So that's kind of this tank in a nutshell. And would I recommend picking it up? I don't know. It is quite expensive. It is. I don't know if it's even on for sale 24/7, but I know, back in the day, this thing I think was around 12,000 gold, which is that's probably about $50, which is kind of insane. But, if you have expendable income, like I've had over the years, and you really want a unique high credit earning potential tier 8 heavy tank, yeah, I think this thing is kind of worth picking up. It will earn you a lot of money, and it's a classic tank. So we'll talk about this game a little bit. So we're here on Ghost Town. This is a tier 8 game, and when you're top tier in this tank, it is really, really exciting to play because you know that you have armor that is strong for your tier, and especially if you're fighting lower tiers. So we've been fighting and working this corner a little bit. Thankfully, we haven't had to go and find enemies, which is where this tank really kind of suffers. This tank is really good when the enemies come to you, so we're gonna be fighting this corner here, and I see this Sturm Tiger, and he really wants me for some reason. Never mind the fact there's like 4 teammates on his flank, and there you go. I mean, if he got the shot off, maybe it would have been worth it, but I kind of doubt it. And his team was still in this game. I think that play was just a little bit unnecessary, but we'll fight this T-28 here, and you see going through his lower plate there with a standard round. That is a very heavily armored tier 8 tank destroyer. And I don't really have a need to load premium, and there you go. You see me side scraping this corner here, and this is where this tank feels just really, really good because you just have so much side armor for your tier that even that tank with 248 pen, he's not getting through, and I'm just blocking shots here. And I might not be getting through him because he's actually angling fairly well. But if I was a bit smarter, I would have aimed for his cupolas, which would have been a very viable penetration. And now we have a T-29 coming up here. And again, I'm only side scraping here and showing my side, hiding that front lower plate around the corner and only presenting side armor for them to shoot at. And my gun is more than good enough to get through a T-29. 234 pen. You're not going to have good DPM, but you can definitely hurt tanks. And we're putting the positional battle this game, maybe not just raw health and kills, but we're going to start steamrolling here in a second. And I just wanted to pay attention to this shot right here because I have a hold down T-29 and that thing has legendary turret armor, but I'm a tall tank and I'm just going to zoom in on his cupola, and there's that accuracy. This gun, when you give it time to aim and you're not forced to snap shots, it is immensely satisfying. And we have a fortress rolling up here, starting to run a little low on health, so I'm going to start playing a bit more conservatively, but we kind of have this game in the bag, and I blocked a good amount of damage here, and I'll end up doing a pretty decent amount of damage as well. And you'll see on the end plate, the end screen here, I'll get quite a bit of credits off of this thing. Like I said, this thing has made me a lot of money over the years. So in endgame situations like this one right here, when you're kind of mopping up, heavy tanks are never the vehicles you really like to play, but especially this one because you're chasing the battle and you're chasing the damage. And this thing, I'm on flat ground. I can't even get up to 30 kilometers an hour. It is definitely not the strength. So in a lot of ways, this tank is it really enjoys traditional heavy tank maps like this map right here, which is Ghost Town, because they're small. It's easy to get to the battle. And once you're in the battle, it's more about a positional battle around corners and using your armor effectively as opposed to, trying to get uphill to go hold down or make a push for a position that's maybe across some open terrain. This vehicle just it's really not flexible enough for those kinds of situations. But thankfully, this is a pretty good team here. We're coming up on this T-32. Again, more than enough penetration to get through his side. And even if he angles towards me, the T-32's frontal plate actually is kind of strong these days, but had I reloaded in time here, I have all the confidence in the world I would have put a shell right through his front plate and got another kill. So there you go. There was that game. We got one more coming up here in a second, but top on damage, top on XP, a whole butt ton of credits there. And you can get some really good results in this tank, even though you don't pump out damage, which is kind of in a lot of ways one of the most fascinating things about this vehicle. I mean, this whole session I had really good games where I was doing well over three and approaching 4,000 damage, which is hard to do when your DPM is this bad. But I actually tend to get more damage in this tank than I do with others. I think it just forces you to kind of slow down and really pick your shots so you're not rushing them. And then with that good penetration and accuracy, your shots are actually likely to go through. So this last game here is on Pilsen. Unfortunately, we're doing Assault, and it's the classic East-West spawn. I've talked about that in some previous videos. I wish they would just make it so this map was always a North-South fight. The map plays so much better when you're doing North-South as opposed to this because it just encourages horrible just hold down, sit on your side of the map, and wait to get spotted. And games often go the entire duration, and it's really frustrating. But I really like this game because this is a tier 10 match, and I wanted to show a game where I wasn't top tier. And that first game was a tier 9 game you saw on steps. But, this game I'm actually finding some tier 10s, and you're going to see surprisingly how well this gun and this armor can work if you're kind of aware and playing intelligently. So give me a quick second here. I'm going to sip my beverage. We're doing the White Monster today, ladies and gentlemen, the Nectar of the Gods. That's good stuff. So, as you see me doing in some previous videos on Pilsen, when I get this Eastern spawn, I really like to go to the middle here because it gives you a lot of options. It is a fairly risky play because if enemies are aggressive and push, and you lose either of the flanks of this kind of hangar bay here in a quick fashion, you're just completely in the open and you're going to get farmed and you're going to have a bad game. But I find that a lot of times the way this game ends up playing out is, it doesn't develop that quickly because people aren't really able to push. And you're seeing me spotting some of these tanks here I'm worried about on the northern part of this hangar behind me. And they can't quite yet push to shoot me because I still have some teammates that are sitting back on our ridge and our side of the map. So that's kind of the factor that makes this play viable. But if your team collapses quickly or just doesn't have enough tanks to hold them back, this position it will be pretty unplayable pretty quickly. So I'm kind of keeping that in mind. I'm trying to kill this Emil too, and you're seeing me. I have no problems penetrating him, even if he faced me with his armor. It wouldn't be an issue. And now I'm very cognizant of the fact that right there where I just looked over, those tanks at any moment could start pushing because we don't have too many teammates over on that side anymore, and they're going to get free shots into my side, and I have zero cover. So what I'm going to do here is I see they don't have a tremendous amount of tanks on this side, is I want to go ahead and push up in the hangar, but on the southern side, which is the side I'm currently on. And that's going to let me get some safer angles, I should say. Not too safe, but right there is the play I'm talking about. Once they push forward, you can't sit here. So now I'm going to go ahead and push up so that they have to push up even more on that side to get shots into me, and they're a bit more reluctant to do that. And this will also help me clear out some of these tanks on this side of the map. So I'll go ahead and I'll wait for this guy to go airborne and get a nice little shot into him. And then you're going to see me push forward, and I can actually start working the opposite side of the hangar. I've been working the southern side, and now we're going to start working the northern side. I do want to get a quick shot of this chieftain while he's distracted by my light tank, and then my light tank is not long for this world. He goes down. So now I'm really in a pickle here, but thankfully this tank is, when you get some cover and can side scrape, I'm not scared of tier 10s even. I waited right there for the E4 to fire his gun, because had I shot him first, he easily could have just turned his gun to me and killed me in one shot. I only have 833 health left, and that's it's not a lot of health, unfortunately, but we're gonna kind of make it work here. So this T-57 Heavy, he's the guy who put me there on that health in the first place, and I'm just gonna try and kind of hold this angle because he's shown he does like to back up quite a bit, and I don't think he quite knows that I'm here. He's not really aware, so we're just holding this angle. The game's pretty steady right now. 10 tanks each side. They have more health. We're gonna try to cut that out. Go ahead and shoot him in the back. Now he's aware that I'm here. So now again, just classic Lion gameplay. I'm going to go ahead and side scrape and show him that side armor. And this is why I love this tank. Shoot him, bounce one, and he's going to shoot in a second, I believe. Bear with me. And you see here I'm waiting on the reload. And in between shots, you're really good at baiting enemy shots. And I think, yeah, he ends up getting frustrated here in a second, actually. And it's two that he doesn't penetrate. There's a ricochet. And then there's a ricochet. So that was an entire clip from a tier 10 autoloading heavy tank that I bounced and I killed him. I mean, just tier 8 heavy tank, by the way. So if you don't believe me that you can bounce some pretty incredible rounds, there you go. I mean, it's so satisfying to block damage. And the E4, great play by my team. I was able to bait him and survive the shot on 43 health. And I got a tier 10 tank destroyer killed effectively in my tier 8 heavy tank. So you could have some pretty impactful plays in here between blocking all those shots from the T57 heavy, as well as, what I just did to that E4. And now I'm going back to work on this chieftain because it seems like on the northern side, the enemy team just they don't want to push anymore, which gives me free reign to keep working this position. Another light tank is going in there to fight the chieftain, and right here I have to make a pretty split-second decision because he's loaded, and I snap a shot into his lower plate. Again, snapshots aren't great, but this gun can pull off some impressive shots with its level of accuracy, even on the move. And I've done quite a bit of damage, quite a bit of assistance. 3 kills. I've killed, I think, what is it? A T-57 Heavy, that guy, and then another tank. But unfortunately here, my game is going to come to an end. I bounced one of that T-114 shots with his 300 and I think 310 millimeters of heat penetration, but he gets around me and puts me out of my misery. And unfortunately, we do not win this game. I think I impacted it as much as I could, specifically as a bottom tier tank, but you're going to see here, time's running out, it's assault, and even though we have more tanks, they win the game. My team just couldn't quite come through, but still a phenomenal round in this tank, and one I really wanted to show because even as a bottom tier tank and as miserable as it could be sometimes, you guys could still have quite a bit of impact, and we were pretty close to winning that game, and I like to think I had more than an insignificant portion in that, right? And that was 226,000 credits. God, wow, that's a lot of money right there, for especially for War 2. And this tank is still pretty it's still pretty good in 2026. It's never been a powerhouse and a meta defining tank. It'll always be kind of weak, unfortunately, because damage is king. But let me know your guys' thoughts on the Lion. I just had some of those great replays. Wanted to share them with you guys and get your thoughts. So I hope you guys are doing well. And until we talk next time, take care of yourselves.